Welcome back to SelectChicago for our keynote session today. I have Mike Moyer with author of the book Slicing Pie. He's been a great guest of SelectChicago and our parent organization GWDC for the last 5-6 years. He has some great content about founders' equity and how to slice pie. So Mike, take it away.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here. It's not nice to get out of my house once in a while and get downtown. Today we're going to talk about perfect equity splits in early stage bootstrap startup companies. And let's see if my slides showing up anywhere. So equity splits are often the first deal that people do. So the first deal is we'll start our company, then I'll find a partner, and the first major deal I'm going to do is with my co-founders. And we're going to split up equity somehow. And that's usually how people kind of go about it. And ideally, your share of the equity should equal your share of your value, your contribution divided by the total value. So ideally, it's what you do versus what the whole thing is worth. The problem is we can't tell what these values are going to be. We don't know what the total value of your contribution is going to be. It's impossible to know. And furthermore, we don't know the value of your company. It's impossible to know that too. So what happens is we wind up with the employee or the co-founder's promises divided by the dreams of the founder. So the founder will say, we're going to be worth billions of dollars in our IPO. So if I give you a little sliver of the equity, you're going to be worth millions of dollars. It's going to be great, and everyone's going to get rich. And it's a ridiculous conversation. So unfortunately, we go find advice for this topic. We go to lawyers and professors and advisors and good, well-meaning, educated, successful people that want us to succeed. And they tell us, so what's the estimate of your financial projections? What's the rule of thumb? Or what's the industry standard? Or what's what's going to happen? They ask you forward-thinking questions. You don't know what's going to happen. The future is unknowable. The one thing that we know for sure is that we don't know what's going to happen. So we wind up just guessing. And most guesses fall into what's called a fixed equity split. A fixed equity split is when you express equity in the form of X% and Y% and Z%. If you dole it out in fixed chunks in advance of any work going on. Most companies split equity with fixed equity splits at the outset of the venture, meaning before anything's actually known, we split equity up. So we go in 60-40. Maybe it's, I get 60% because it's my idea, for instance, and you get 40%. Or I get 51% because I want to maintain control, or any variation thereof. But usually people say, screw it, let's keep it simple. We'll go 50-50 because we're buddies, and that's how we're going to do it. Or a third, a third, a third. 90% of startups do equal equity splits, which means we're going to assume that each of us is going to do exactly the same amount of work in the future, which is, of course, never the case. Because what happens if you do all the work? So we're 50-50, and you do all the work, and I own half your company, and I'm not doing anything, which is very common. Or what if you want to bring in another guy? So I'm a marketing person, and you're a technology person. We want to bring in a new technology person. That technology person helps you, doesn't help me. Does it come out of your share or my share? There's a million things that can change. Once I was with the company where the CTO was hit by a bus and subsequently died of his injuries. His wife inherited his half of the company, which she should have. And the remaining co-founder asked me, does this mean I have to share my profits with her forever? Indeed it does. And she had no skills to build the company. They had a long way to go. But that company ultimately went out of business because they were unable to resolve that situation. So the only thing that never changes in your company is the fact that it's always changing. So when something changes, you'll have either greater than your fair share, meaning that your value of your contribution over the total value is more than you deserve, or you'll have less than you deserve. Now, some people are okay having more than they deserve, but nobody's okay having less than they deserve. So the problem here is what I call an alligator pit negotiation. We have your less than gator and your greater than gator. When you go into a negotiation with your co-founders, like it's an alligator pit, your instinct is to get out of there as soon as possible, to get as much for yourself as you can, to think about it, every man for himself. Those aren't the kind of emotions you want to bring to the table with your co-founders. You want to be cooperative and always know you're getting taken care of. So what happens after the alligator pit is you get what's called a fix and fight. You do a fixed split, and you fight about it later when things change. And you fight about it going to another alligator pit, and what you come out of the alligator pit is with another fixed split. So you go fix and fight, it goes over and over and over again, and it's not fair if it's not fun. It's not going to be fun if it's not fair. So we have to make it fun. If it's fair, it'll be fun. So if startups aren't fun, people are going to quit them. I love being an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur most of my career. I've worked for the man before, and I haven't enjoyed it. I really enjoy being an entrepreneur. But when things don't turn out fair, it hurts a lot. And I've been on both sides of the fence. I've been in situations where I've had more than my fair share, and I've been in situations where I've had less than my fair share. It's fun getting a lot of money. You feel kind of bad, but I don't know how to give back to. I know some people took good, maybe got less than they deserved. But getting screwed is really painful, and it's something that really takes a lot of confidence away. So we want to make sure we're always fair. So the best way to understand a fair equity split is through a game of blackjack. Let's pretend that you and I are going to play blackjack together as a team, not as opponents, but as a team. And we're going to split the winnings 50-50 because we're friends. We go to Las Vegas, and we each put a chip on the same hand of blackjack. There's my chip, and there's your chip. We don't know if we're going to win. We don't know how much we're going to win. We don't know how long it's going to take to win. The future is unknowable. We can't tell the future. What we know for sure, though, is we each bet one chip. Now, the dealer deals two aces. There's an ace and another ace. This is a good hand. In blackjack, you split the aces and double down. So we're going to split them and double down. But I'm out of chips and you're not. So you put two more chips down. So now you've bet three chips and I bet one chip. We still don't know if we're going to win. We don't know how much we're going to win. We don't know how long it's going to take to win. We're confident, we're excited, we're optimistic because we want to win, but we don't know for sure. All we know for certain, though, is that you bet one, is I bet one, and you bet three. If we win, a 50-50 split isn't fair. You should get 75% and I should get 25%. Logically, your share of the winnings should reflect your share of the bets. And startups are exactly the same thing. But instead of betting on cards, we're betting on ideas. And we bet our time and our money and relationships and facilities and supplies and equipment. Every time we contribute to a startup company, and we're not paid for our contribution. We're essentially placing a bet on the future outcome of that company. Just like in blackjack, we're placing a bet. And the value of our bet is always equal to the fair market value of our contribution. So if you're worth $100,000 a year, and I don't pay you a year worth of salary, you're effectively betting $100,000 in unpaid salary. If you buy a plane ticket that costs $1,000, and I don't reimburse you, you're effectively betting $1,000 on the future of the company. And the betting will continue until the company can afford to pay you, either because it's raised money or you get enough revenue in the door. So what Slicing Pie does is it simply keeps in mind this concept. A person's share of the equity should be based on that person's share of the bets. That's all we're doing. So Slicing Pie simply looks at the bets and keeps track of who bet what and divides up equity based on that. That's all we're doing. We're looking at the bets and dividing up equity based on that. If you do it this way, you're always guaranteed to get what's the right split. In a fixed equity split, it feels good to know what you're going to get in advance. It's comforting. The problem is, no matter what you get, it's going to be the wrong number. In Slicing Pie, you don't know what you're going to get in advance. You don't know until the betting stops. The good news is, no matter what you get, it's going to be exactly the right number. So there's two pieces to this model. The first model is the Allocation Framework, which determines how we divide up equity based on this betting concept. And the second is the recovery model, how we get equity back from people when they leave the company. This animal is called a grunt. You may see it referred to as a grunt fund sometimes. It's a fictional animal that represents the hard-working entrepreneur that does underappreciated work. It is a universal, one-size-fits-all solution for the allocation and recovery of equity in an early-stage bootstrap company. What that means is it works exactly as I described, no matter where you are on the planet, no matter what kind of currency you're using, no matter what kind of company you're starting. It always works exactly as I described. I've been doing this for about 10 years. I wrote the first white paper of Slicing Pie in 2008. In all of that time, thousands of companies across the whole world have used it. I've never once heard a situation where it's backfired and not produced a fair split. It always works as long as you follow the rules. So here's the allocation framework. In Slicing Pie, we use a unit of risk called a slice. A slice is like a poker chip. It just represents the fact that a bet took place. It's not worth anything in itself. It just marks the fact that a bet took place. So it's called a slice. The first step is you convert the contributions to slices based on the fair market values. And then at any given time, your share is equal to your slices divided by all the slices. Just like in poker, it was your chip divided by all the chips. And it will self-adjust over time to maintain fairness. That's why it's called a dynamic equity split versus a fixed equity split. There's two kinds of contributions you can make. There's non-cash contributions, which are things like time and ideas and facilities, things that don't require cash out of your pocket to contribute. And there are cash contributions, which do require cash out of your pocket. Things like unreimbursed expenses, travel expenses, credit card payments, things like that. And some things fall in between. So a used piece of equipment, for instance, may be considered cash or non-cash, depending on when it was acquired. So first you take the fair market value, whatever that is, and everything has a fair market value. And we know that because most companies that are in business buy things for their business, for operations in business, using the fair market value. I know that if I go to Amazon and buy a ream of copy paper, it's going to cost $5.99. I know that if I buy a copy machine or a computer, I can know the fair market value of that. Everything's always knowable. To convert to slices, you do two times multipliers. For every dollar in non-cash you put in, you get two slices in the pie. That marks the fact that a bet took place. Now, cash is different. If I paid you $100 an hour to work for me, and you wanted to buy a thing that cost $100, it would take you more than an hour to earn enough money, because when I paid you, I pay employment taxes or Social Security taxes. When you receive the money, you pay income taxes, and when you buy the stuff, you pay VAT tax or sales tax. So it may take you 2 hours to earn enough money to buy the thing. So for that reason, we have to double the slices to compensate for the difference. So you get 4 slices per dollar in cash contribution. So every dollar in non-cash, you get 2 slices. Every dollar in cash, you get 4 slices. This smooths out the difference between cash and non-cash. So for instance, take your time. You take your fair market salary, let's say it's $100,000 a year. We multiply it by, you divide it by 2,000, which is the number of hours in a year. So every hour that goes by, you're betting $50 in unpaid compensation. You multiply it by 2 to get your grunt hourly resource rate, or GRR, which is the sound you make when you're hard at work at your company. So here's an example. $50 an hour is $100,000 a year. Multiplied by 2 is 100 slices per hour. That means every hour I work for the company, I'm essentially betting 100 slices on that company, just like the poker chips. If the company was able to pay you part of your salary, say $10 an hour, then your risk goes down, so your bet goes down. So every hour, when you pay $10 an hour, it goes down to 80 slices per hour. And over time, as you're paid more and more and more, your bets will diminish over time. Money, small amounts of cash, is times 4 when it's consumed. So if your money is put in the bank, it's not at risk. When it becomes consumed by expenses, it becomes at risk. It's times 4. Equipment, if I purchase it for the company, it's a cash out-of-pocket expense. It's unreimbursed expense. It's times 4 because it's cash. If I owned it previously, it's treated as non-cash, either at the resale value or the purchase price, depending on how old it is. Everything has a fair market value. We think of ideas as really important. Relationships is really important. Relationships are very important only if they convert to revenue or some kind of value to the company, in which case a finder's fee or a commission is due. It's a non-cash contribution, so it's times 2. Everyone gets hung up on ideas. Ideas are really important, and ideas are important as long as they produce value for the company. So if your idea is valuable, then it can be licensed to the organization. If you can't license it, it may not be valuable. People say, what's the value of my idea? If you can't sell it to anybody, it's either worthless or it's priceless. Usually it's worthless. One of the nice things about using this methodology is that if your idea turns out to be not any good and you pivot away, you won't have paid a lot for the idea in the first place. So ideas are important to the extent that they're licensable. Unreimbursed expenses on office supplies or equipment are times 4 because they're cash out of pocket. So here we are at SelectChicago, a bunch of grunts milling around looking for opportunities. One of them has an idea. He puts together a team. There's a junior developer. He puts in his time and his ideas and some equipment. The junior developer puts in some development time. Her job is putting together the app and the website. And the rich uncle bankrolls the thing and makes some important connections. The first step is convert to slices, like that. You simply add up all the slices to get the total slices, and you divide each person's share. There's number 1, 2, and 3. And now the pie looks like this. At this point in time, if the company was to reach break-even or a Series A investment, this would represent the equity split. It makes sense that the rich uncle has more shares than the junior developer because she didn't do that much work, and the rich uncle bankrolled the thing. Now let's add something to the mix. This is Barry. He's a sales guy, lots of connections. He's going to put in time and some relationships, and he's going to earn some slices in the pie. All you do is add his stuff into the rest of the pie, and we're going to pretend for a moment no one else does any work this period, but in reality they'd be making more bets. And so you simply redivide everyone's share. There's number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and now the split looks like this. Now if the rich uncle wasn't willing to budge on his split, then it would have had to come out of the junior developer's share and the founder's share, and they would have to fight about who gets what. And when that changed again, that would cause another fight between all three of them. So because the model is dynamic and it self-adjusts based on what the contributions are, we get a perfectly fair split. So now let's see what happens when someone leaves the company. There are 4 reasons why someone can leave a company. They can be fired for good reason. Being fired for good reason implies that you weren't doing your job. You got a warning, you still didn't do your job, you got another warning, you still didn't do your job, and you're fired. You got to give someone a warning, otherwise it's not fair. Unless they're doing something that's so reprehensible that it's obvious they're fired. Embezzlement, bringing a gun to work, sexually harassing somebody. If it's clear that they should be fired, there's no question about it. But if it's performance-based, then it's warning, warning, fired. You can also fire them for no good reason. So without a warning and without a good reason, it's considered no good reason. I can fire you for whatever I want to. You're fired. It's at-will employment. So be it. You can also resign for good reason. Resigning for good reason is important because it implies that the company made promises that it couldn't keep. And startups are notorious for making forward-thinking promises. We're going to be rich, we're going to make money, we're going to raise cash, we're going to build a product. If the company makes a promise that it can't keep, you have good reason to resign. For instance, you might say, we're based in Chicago, we're moving to Seattle, pack your bags, get your kids in the car, it's not what you signed up for, so now you can resign for good reason. Or I might have said, we'll pay you in 6 months, the salary never materializes, so now you have a good reason to resign. And resignation with no good reason is the 4th one. Means that you are resigning for your own reasons. Maybe you can't afford to work for free anymore. Maybe you got a better job somewhere else. Maybe you just don't like the job anymore. You can quit for whatever reason you want, and that's okay. But in reasons A and D, if you are fired for good reason or resign for no good reason, you're essentially walking away from your bet. So you lose your slices for non-cash contributions. It's painful to leave a company under these circumstances, as it should be. If you want to play this game, don't walk away. Don't get fired. It gives incentive not to get fired or not quit. So it aligns the interest of you with the interest of the organization. On the flip side, if you resign for good reason or you're fired for no good reason, you keep your slices in the pie. Your bet stays on the table. It'll get diluted by other slices as they're added, but when the slices convert to equity, you'll always have your fair share. Now, companies would love to get that equity back from you, but under these circumstances, it can't because it's got to treat you fairly going forward. So no matter what happens, no matter what decisions people make, no matter how the pie transpires, you'll always get exactly what you deserve. So here's an example. Here's our team again. The junior developer stopped showing up to work. So she's going to get a phone call from her boss, and she's going to get a warning. 2 weeks later, she doesn't do her job again. A second warning, third warning, she's fired. All she had on the table was non-cash contributions. So they come out of the pie. They're gone. And you recalculate everyone's shares. There's 2, 3, and 4. And now the pie automatically self-adjusts to maintain fairness. Now, it's unfortunate that she left. Everyone has a little bit more equity because so, but then they got to find a new developer now, so they're not necessarily better off. But as things change, the pie self-adjusts to maintain fairness. Now, eventually, you want to bake the pie. Baking the pie means you've stopped using the slicing pie model, and you freeze the equity for your subsequent rounds of investment. It turns a crisp golden brown. Tastes delicious. You do this at break-even or Series A. Break-even is when you have enough cash through revenue generation that you can pay all your expenses, including salaries. A lot of founders leave out their salaries and say, we're profitable even without salaries. You're not profitable until you're paying your salaries first. So let's say you're worth $50 an hour and you're not making any money per hour. You're betting 100 slices. Company generates revenue. It can start paying you. Now your slices bets go down to 80 slices per hour on a go-forward basis. As the company generates more money, say $20 an hour, your bet goes down. $30 an hour, your bet goes down. $40 an hour, your bet goes down. Eventually, they're going to pay you a full salary, and your bet is down to 0 slices per hour. So the pie naturally stops accumulating slices, and it naturally bakes. At that point, you issue regular common shares, and you go on about your life with your subsequent rounds. If your expenses exceed if your revenue exceeds your expenses, what's left over is profits. You got 2 choices. You can invest those profits back in the company, which is called retained earnings, or you can distribute those profits as dividends to shareholders, and Slicing Pie determines its share of those profits. That's the bet paying off. The other way the bet pays off is you sell the company, your proceeds of the sale match your Slicing Pie. This is just like in Blackjack. It was a 2/3, 1/3 split. We've kept track of the bets, and now the bets are paying off. So you're getting exactly what you deserve out of your contribution to the company. And the second way to freeze the pie or bake the pie is by raising money. So let's say we raise $1 million at a $900,000 pre-money valuation. You add the investor's $1 million in there, now it's worth $1.9 million. You've just sold 53% of your company, for instance. You use that money to pay salaries and pay expenses and cover all the expenses, so there's no more bets being taking place. But now when the profits come in, you've got to share them with the Series A investor. So what we get is a perfectly fair distribution of equity. It's not sort of fair, what people think is fair. It's perfectly fair. It's rewarding the actual contributions people make, not what they promise they're going to make or say they're going to make, what they actually do. It's providing ongoing motivation. People are motivated to continue participating and stay with the pie and not get fired or quit. It's flexible in the face of rapid change. At no point did I have to stop and call a lawyer and redo my agreement. And it gets rid of the gators. Everyone knows they're being treated fairly no matter what happens. So there's 3 reasons why someone would not want to do this in a startup company. The first reason is they don't get it. It's been explained to them. They're mulling it over in their head, maybe much like you are right now. They don't get it. It's my job to teach the world how this works. And I've written several books about it. One's called Slicing Pie Handbook. That's the one you should buy. It's called the Slicing Pie Handbook. The book has been translated into 10 different languages all over the United States, all over the world. It's been used by thousands of companies all over the world. There's tons of free resources. There's software that's available you can use on my website. There's free downloads of spreadsheets. There's legal agreements there's lawyers all over the world. Take the time to learn this model and understand it, and you'll see that it's obvious the way it works. Now, the second reason someone doesn't want to use slicing pie is because they're not willing to learn slicing pie. Lots of people say, just give me my 5% or give me my X% and let's just go from there. They don't want to learn it. That's okay if they don't want to learn it, but you don't want to work with someone who doesn't want to learn new things. So I always suggest you back off from those people. If an investor doesn't want your deal, you'll find another investor. If your company is good, if it's a good investment, you'll find other investors. If you're desperate, that becomes a problem. And that comes to the third reason someone wouldn't want to do it. The third reason is they do get it. They do understand slicing pie, but it's their intention to take advantage of you. If you find someone like this, they're taking advantage of your desperation, and you may have no choice. But just walk carefully with a deal like that because you're getting taken advantage of. So that's how slicing pie works. Like I say, it always works because equity and fairness isn't a matter of opinion. It's a matter of facts. The facts are people make contributions for which they're not paid, and those contributions are bets on the future. If you keep track of the bets, you'll always know how to divide equity no matter what changes, no matter what happens.
Great. You have time for questions?
Absolutely.
And I know I have questions because I think last time we sat down together to do a presentation was on version 1.0 of the book.
Yes.
So what has changed in the last 6 years, 8 years on the model that you put together?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. I originally envisioned slicing pie as being kind of a hacker's model where people could kind of change things as they saw fit and kind of use it a little more fluidly. What I've learned since then is that there's only one version of fairness. It's either fair or it's not fair. If our dad gives us a cookie, we split it at 50-50, right? Because we paid equal amounts of nothing to get it. Mm-hmm. So you split it, I pick the half I get.
Right.
There's no other way to look at it. In Blackjack, there's no other way to look at it. 2/3 to 1/3. And because of that, I had to standardize the model. I couldn't, it's either cash or non-cash countries. So I've standardized it and I've stuck to the model. In the past, people would someone might say, "Oh, slicing pie didn't work." That's because they didn't follow the model. When they follow the model, it always works. So the main changes are I'm more crisp and clear about how the model works and then stick to it more closely.
That's great. And the online tools are phenomenal because I remember the first time was a couple of Excel sheets.
Yeah.
And we were just we were conveying it to our networking group, and it really took to heart. I know over the last period of time I've been consulting with a number of startup companies, and I always refer them to your book.
Thank you.
Because it is the best way of bringing in equity. And I know, and it's been fun to watch our crew, behind the camera while you were speaking because they're all nodding their heads and go, yeah, I wish I would have done it in this point and this point.
The biggest comment I get is I wish I learned to slicing pie 10 years ago or 5 years ago before I started my last company.
Yeah, and as things progress, how does that work when you want to reset? Let's pretend the 6 of us that are in this room had a company had been operating for a while in an unfair model.
Right.
And we all agree to create the start next week. We're going to go to this model. How does that really play out?
So lots of companies find slicing pie when they realize their fixed split isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
So they got partners that aren't doing any work, and this guy's dead weight, and they want to fire him, and they want to buy him out. They don't know what to do because the fixed split is backfired.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a thing called a retrofit. A retrofit is applying the slicing pie model to past events. And there's a spreadsheet online called the retrofit spreadsheet. And what I recommend in that situation is everyone fills it out with their knowledge of the information and then compares notes. It'll tell you where your pie should be at this point in time. And if our answers kind of match, we're on the same page. If they don't match, it's a bigger conversation. But you can easily retrofit slicing pie and reapply the rules. Now, in some cases, you'll get someone that's stubborn and they have more than their fair share. Mm-hmm. Your original contract simply gives them the right to be a jerk. It doesn't mean it doesn't make it fair. If we agreed to 50-50 to our Blackjack game, we agreed to it, we signed it, it's legal, I can sue you and probably win. That doesn't make it right, though. Just because we agreed to something doesn't make it right. So you have someone who's in a situation where they have a legal right to be a jerk. Now, you can unwind that. If that happens, that's an advanced skill. That's all the answer. But usually people say, yes, it's fair to do it this way, and they want to readjust their equity so everyone can move forward naturally.
Okay. And then what happens when, let's just say you're not gone to Series A yet, but you believe you are break even, and then you're starting to pay things out. What happens if you have a bad quarter? How do you reset, the clock again? You're going to pull this, pie out of the oven because it's just not working.
You can reopen a pie if you have to. And I always tell people, keep the pie open until it's reliable that you'll have a break even. So the first month you're break even, you may keep the pie open. Slicing pie implies that you're distributing equity at a zero valuation. Companies aren't valuable until they have something to value. They have either customer bases or product or intellectual property or revenue or something they can value. Slicing pie companies are bootstrapped. They're both basically liabilities. They're just generating expenses and expenses and expenses. So until the company is reliably valuable, this pie doesn't freeze. But you might issue your round of shares at one point and don't reopen the pie if you have to. You just got to be careful that you haven't reached a valuation point where you're issuing shares at a valuation.
Yeah. Take us through an idea of, let's pretend somebody had an idea and you had said, ideas have value, or they have no value until they're proving value. But let's just say you were interested in somebody's idea, and would it be best to set a predetermined value on that as an idea, since if this person didn't want to do any of the work, but actually had almost a patentable idea that you were going to go take and run with?
And that's the real key. There's two ways of thinking about this. The first way of thinking about it is that it's your job to have good ideas. So I used to be the head of marketing for a fishing tackle box company. And people would come to me with ideas for fishing tackle boxes. Mm-hmm. If I liked their idea, I would give them a royalty on their idea if we made it, of 2% on revenues. Okay. So an idea in the fishing tackle box world is 2%. Now, if I had ideas, I wouldn't get any royalty because it was my job to have good ideas. If I didn't have ideas, I would get fired. Okay. So if your idea is fixed in space as a copyright, as a patent, as a trademark, then that idea is licensable to somebody who might want to license it. If it's just an idea like, hey, I got an idea, you should go run with it, it's not worth much. So if it's licensable, I should be able to find somebody else to license it. If I can find others to license it, I can establish a market for that idea. And I can say, okay, instead of licensing it to General Motors, I'll license it to our startup for the same price. The other way is thinking about, all right, I have an idea, and I'm going to develop the idea, but the time and energy I put into the legal patent and all that stuff is part of my pie, and we'll go forward from there. So people get hung up on this issue a lot, but you really step back from it. It's not the idea that makes the difference, it's the work that goes into the idea that makes the difference.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the best things about the contracts that you have, or the sample model contracts that you have in the back, is it does start to really lay out a very fair and equitable piece to it. If I remember right, there was also a vesting period in that too, so if you work, or did that come out?
Thanks for bringing that up. Most vesting is time-based. Mm-hmm. It's for some reason, when I was starting out, it was 5-year vesting. Now it's 4-year vesting. Vesting is not a good idea. Don't vest, because the only thing vesting does for you is retain employees. Mm-hmm. So after someone's got their shares, you can reverse vest them and retain them. Slicing pie is the vesting tool. So what we would do in a C Corp, we would issue each other restricted shares, say 10,000 shares each, and then they'd be unvested until Slicing Pie bakes. So let's say Slicing Pie told us it was 2/3, 1/3, then 10,000 of your shares would vest, and 5,000 of my shares would vest. Now it would be 2/3, 1/3. So Slicing Pie determines the vesting.
Okay, and then just for clarity, because this was also a really great model when I was working with some people, because I think I'm on my 5th or 7th company now, bringing people in that still had to put food on the table and still needed to make ends meet. So walk us through the scenario of, as somebody comes in, let's say it's a marketing a marketing analysis person, and that has a predetermined rate you agree to what that person should be paid in a real world environment, and then you multiply that by 2 of that sweat equity. And then how does that then walk you through of, you get cash coming out because they're getting 1/3 because they need to make $5,000 a month or something like that. How does that work with the program?
It's important to be really careful about setting the fair market value, because when you can pay it, you will pay it. So as money comes in the door, if I don't need the money and you do, for instance, we can allocate some of that money to you to get paid.
Right.
And what that does is it reduces your risk. It doesn't increase my risk because it's not my money, it's the company's money. So it reduces your risk. So your bets per hour go down to 0. In fact, if I paid you 100% of your fair market value from day one, you wouldn't deserve any equity.
Right.
Because you haven't taken any risk. But if part of your salary is at risk, the part of your salary that's at risk counts as slices. If I paid you out of my own pocket, say $1,000 a month, then I'm risking the $1,000 cash. So I get 4 slices per dollar for my cash investment, and it reduces yours by 2,000 slices.
Right.
So I earn slices at a higher rate, giving you the incentive to not take cash as much as possible. So you take the minimum amount of cash. So our interests are aligned. But if you had to pay cash to somebody, you can't pay cash to them, and that'll reduce their risk. And when you get enough cash to pay everybody, you should be paying everybody.
Okay, and so when you start paying everybody, let's say you have hit break even, and then basically the slices are stopped being earned in this grunt fund at that point, and then you're just leaving that equity piece alone, and as you're starting to pay everybody until you're able to have basically a dividend event at that point.
Well, once the pie stopped accumulating slices, you'd say we reached break even or Series A. We no longer need slicing pie. We're going to discontinue it now and issue equity. In an LLC, you can just adjust your membership shares. In a C Corp, you do divesting or issuing shares. There's a number of ways to do it.
Yeah, and you'd said you wanted a company should be really viable at that point. Have you seen many companies go too early and stop using slicing pie just too early because 3 months down the road something happens, or you have to rebake it, or
I haven't really. I'm in touch with lots of people. I do hundreds of phone calls, but not everybody who buys the book tells me what happened.
Okay.
So when's the last time you bought a book and called the author and said, "Hey, here's what happened 2 years later"? So it doesn't always happen that way. I've never heard somebody come back and say the slicing pie backfired and didn't create a fair split.
Okay, great. Any questions out there? I know you two probably have questions on this because I can see your eyes open. So Chandler, I know you had a question or two.
Put me on the spot here, sorry.
But I mean, you're starting up a company. You two now have an agency. So how are you approaching it? What are you taking away from this besides going in the Amazon account right now to go buy this book?
That's exactly it.
Yeah, and because I also know Cassandra's been involved with a number of startups over a period of times, and she's seen some really bad, flameouts where people are walking away that they thought they had a large percentage of equity, and because their disagreement agreements weren't already baked into what they were doing, just people got hosed.
What I find most disappointing is when the person who flakes out in the beginning gets a buyout from their partners, and then the only one who ever makes any money on the company.
Oh yeah. Oh, I've had a couple of different founder events where, thank goodness, it was all early revenue. They decided they weren't going to go forward, and they all bailed out of it early. Yeah. But I just couldn't imagine having somebody come back 3 years later and going, "Hey, I did all this," and it's like
the Facebook movie.
Yeah, you didn't do any of the grunt work to get it successful. You were here at the pub talking about the idea, and you may have really, it was not anything more than that.
There's a movie called Startup.com. Have you ever seen it?
Oh, yeah,
It was about
I've seen it,
it was a documentary about a startup that was filmed from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 3 founding partners. There was hundreds of millions of dollars, and eventually crashed and burned.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the 3 founders stopped showing up, and they bought him out for $800,000.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the only person that made any money on the deal whatsoever. Under Slicing Pie, he would have gotten about $23,000.
Oh, that's great. And because the other piece with this is, and when everybody has equity, they also then get, potentially liability, because you are, if you have a fractional ownership of a company, and then, hopefully you're making sure you have your officer's insurance on that and your E&O insurance for what you're doing. But basically, how does liability work with that?
Well, if you have the reason for forming a corporate structure, C corp and LLC, is to protect you from that liability. So
Right.
lots of companies move forward without that. And Slicing Pie works no matter what structure you're in.
Okay.
So you want to make sure you do incorporate and do an LLC as soon as possible. That's the purpose of it. You don't have to have one of those structures in place before you start Slicing Pie. So you can still use Slicing Pie from the beginning. In fact, my software allows you to set up a free solo account where it's just one person. So when I start my company, I can start tracking. So when I do bring on partners, I can
Yeah.
show them what's happened.
And how does that work? Let's just say I've started up a firm, and then I've done a year of sweat equity, and I've done it, and I'm bringing on that first employee type person. Am I the pre-revenue, the pre-employee slicing pie model is interesting at that point, but I don't necessarily know many solopreneurs who track all their time and document and say, okay, in this year I actually could have billed 1,208 hours, and that is this equivalent, and I brought in my used car, and I brought in my used printer to come up with, and then I'm bringing on, say, one of our team here and saying, okay, I have this big slice of the pie, and now I'm bringing you, and then we're going to start building it from there.
One of the things that most entrepreneurs do is not keep track. I didn't keep track of my car. I didn't keep track of these things.
Yeah.
The things you track in Slicing Pie are the things most people track anyway. Most companies track their payroll. Most companies track their expenses. Most companies track their equipment. There's things that people do anyway. Because you're a solo entrepreneur, you don't do those things. But if you do those things, you'll have a really good understanding what your cost structures are and what your business requires. I've seen people go 2 or 3 years without making any money. And I'll say, how much would you made if you kept your job? It's $200,000 a year. So you've foregone $600,000, and there's no way. The numbers get wacky after a while.
Yeah.
So by keeping track of what am I foregoing in order to make this business work, is it a good investment? And when you bring a new employee in, you can say, here are my notes. Now you don't have to track by hour. You can track per week. Here's my weekly. I put 30 hours a week in or 40 hours a week in. But as long as that's documented, the new employee can say, that makes sense. I'm coming in having done nothing today.
Right.
So on day one, I have 0 shares, which I shouldn't have. Mm-hmm. But as I work going forward, I'll have my fair share.
Right, and that pool of that big pie is already coming in, and their smaller slice is representative of the multiplier.
Now, if I told you I was billing myself at $700,000 a year, you might say that didn't make sense. Pay me 60.
Yeah.
So it's got to pass the investor sniff test.
And that one's a tough one, because sometimes people look at different companies, and let's say I should be making $250,000 because that's what this company is. Well, this company is pre-revenue, has 0 employees. You are not making $250,000.
Yeah.
Let's look at the grunt task you're doing, and is it biz dev? Is it writing code? Is it doing writing marketing content? And then those should be really, in my opinion, that's how you should be making.
I always think about it in terms of the reason your job isn't worth $250 a year is because you have no responsibility.
Yeah.
There's no employees, like you said. There's no revenue. There's no product. There's really nothing. The risk of failure only affects you. Mm-hmm. If you're the CEO of United Airlines, it affects thousands of people across the world. So it's a high-risk job. So as your company gets more revenue and gets those things, your responsibility will go up, as your salary should. Mm-hmm. But your salaries are generally start out low, not because you don't have the cash, but because there's not much responsibility. So and plus, people wear lots of different hats. Mm-hmm. What Slicing Pie does, if my job is part strategy and part flipping hamburgers, I should hire someone else to flip the hamburgers so I can keep my eye on the ball strategy-wise. So Slicing Pie gives you a mechanism for getting the hamburger flipper in the door. Mm-hmm. Now, if I have a fixed split, anything I do dilutes my shares, so I can't bring anybody else on. With Slicing Pie, you can add those people no problem.
Great. Cassandra.
We have a question from online. Someone asks, how do you value relationships? So specifically when someone leverages their
Good question. Relationships are extremely important only if they turn into value. And the way they turn into value is by becoming a customer or becoming a partner or becoming a vendor or becoming some other strategic relationship. Finder's fees for investment, finder's fees for partnerships, and commissions are usually due on revenue. So if I have a 10% commission, you can either pay me in cash, because I generate cash, or you can pay me in slices as non-cash. So that's the way the sales are usually generated. Now, if I have a big Rolodex and it doesn't produce anything, I shouldn't get any equity because I hadn't produced anything.
Yeah.
And I've worked on companies that have had celebrities on their boards, because so it's so great to have this guy on our board, but he didn't allow him to talk about that he was on the board and didn't introduce anybody, so who cares?
Right, and then, because also you have speaking and things of that, a big Rolodex would say allow me to bring any of our staff here to put them and showcase them in their new role, and putting values on that. If it's just a giver's gain, being a good mensch, or is it just something a little bit more transactional? It
also ups your fair market value. If you have a ton of contacts in the industry, as you do, you're worth more than somebody who doesn't. If I don't know anybody, then you're worth more just because of your contacts.
Great. And I'm going to look at Brian across the way because he just started another company. Is it the loyalty company that you're writing? You're doing consulting now too. So I want to see if you had any questions.
I've got 3 different areas within my business. No, I think you kind of covered it. I guess the biggest question for me is when you do bring on somebody for the first time, or you bring on more employees, and you start, is it monthly that you start splitting up the slices? How often do you do that as people are progressing in to readjust the numbers?
So good question. So the idea is how often, what interval do you readjust? With the Slicing Pie software, people make their own entries, so it readjusts in real time. So at any given time, as long as it's up to date, you know what your split is. With the spreadsheets, people use those. They're free to download. People can do them once a week or once a month. You really just want to set policies for your own company. Every company has their own policies. Expense reports have to be in by the end of the month. So set your own policies. From a legal standpoint, you can play it a number of different ways. Some lawyers like to adjust once a year, for instance, the membership shares. Or in the vesting tool, it would vest when the company froze. There's no set rule there. It's whatever you're comfortable with. It's just like tracking. The granularity that you track is up to you too. I can track by month. This month I put in 150 hours. Or you can track by hour. This hour I did X, Y, Z. It's whatever what you're comfortable with your team, which makes sense.
Thanks.
Great. Well, Mike, thank you again. This is great.
You're welcome.
I always love having you come in and talk because I can talk to you for days.
Yeah.
And what I'm excited about too is you get to be on the panel for the pitch that's going to start as soon as we reset.
Good.
So thank you again for talking about Slicing Pie. You can find it at, what is your website for that?
SlicingPie.com.
SlicingPie.com. And I know it's going to be great to go back to that and reread that. You also have a good bank of consultants that have been using your model.
Yeah, a lot of lawyers.
A lot of
the
lawyers.
world.
Lawyers love this because it all puts everything in writing before you begin.
One thing that I learned from lawyers that I've talked to over the years is that 60 to 80% of fixed equity splits wind up in dispute that require legal intervention. That means the chance of your equity split failing is greater than it not.
Oh, wow.
And like I said before, I've never heard of a single situation where Slicing Pie can't solve that problem, so it really doesn't backfire. So,
Great.
thanks for listening. I really appreciate being here.